Good morning and welcome to Bloomberg UK, a special focus on the biggest challenges facing the British government, economy, financial services and markets. I'm Kriti Gupta in London. Now, Rishi Sunak is facing a backlash among some Conservative MPs after the British Prime Minister confirmed he is indeed rolling back parts of his government's green agenda, including delaying a ban on new petrol and diesel cars by 5 years to 2035. Now, some see the move as a gamble that ceding ground to green policy skeptics on the right of the Conservative Party will appeal to Britons hit by a cost of living crisis. What Sunak denies is that it is a political move, saying instead that the fossil fuel car ban delay brings the UK into line with nations including Germany, France, Australia and Canada.
Now, I'm not saying there will be no hard choices, and nor am I abandoning any of our targets and commitments. I am unequivocal that we will meet our international agreements, including the critical promises in Paris and Glasgow to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees.
The opposition Labour Party has committed itself to keeping the original 2030 ban on petrol and diesel cars, so the move creates a clear divide between the two parties ahead of the next general election. And according to a Bloomberg MLive survey, a majority of finance professionals think that a Labour victory would be the best result for stocks and the pound. Alex Morgan reports.
Labour winning the next general election would be the best result for stocks and the pound. That's according to a new Bloomberg survey. About two-thirds of finance professionals said a win for Keir Starmer's centre-left party or a Labour-led coalition could be the most market-friendly option. Now, that's going to sting for the current Prime Minister and former investment banker Rishi Sunak, and for his Conservative Party, which has long presented itself as the natural partner for business. It's a sign of the damage done to the Conservatives' economic credentials following Brexit and Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget. Last autumn, Britain's borrowing costs spiralled after the newly appointed Prime Minister vowed to slash taxes with no details on how she would balance the books. While the ensuing market turmoil forced Truss out of Downing Street in a record 49 days, UK stocks have still not recovered the confidence lost during that period. That's according to 80% of survey respondents who self-identified as portfolio managers, traders or retail investors. With Labour around 20 points ahead in the polls, they're seeking to capitalise on the government's woes, launching a charm offensive. Keir Starmer and his shadow chancellor Rachel Reeves have made it their mission to schmooze the city and to project an image of economic competence. And so after over 13 years in power, this survey makes it clear that the Conservatives face an uphill battle to regain lost trust and to rebuild their economic credibility. That's ahead of a general election widely expected to be held next year.
Bloomberg's Alex Morgan reporting there on, the hot take going into what the UK financial community really wants out of the political sphere. Let's get a little bit more analysis. Bring in Bloomberg's John Stepek, who reported on the MLive survey we just talked about, as well as our UK political editor, Katie Donaldson. John, I want to start with you here and talk about something that Alex had just mentioned. This is pretty not normal, that the financial community would lean towards the Labour Party. What's the logic here?
I mean, really, it's kind of... The Conservatives have been in power for 13 years, so you get a certain amount of fatigue anyway. And then on top of that, obviously, Brexit happened, which wasn't largely popular with the financial community. And then, of course, a year ago, the gilts market exploded in reaction to kind of Liz Truss's premiership and the mini-budget at that point. So the reality is that, the city has lost faith in the Conservatives. And on the other hand, Labour has moved from being a hard left party under Jeremy Corbyn to being essentially rehabilitated pseudo-Blairite party under Keir Starmer. And I think it's fair to say that Starmer has done a good job of kind of moving the perception along with Rachel Reeves, his shadow chancellor. And so basically it's just a matter of confidence and also, kind of political fatigue. 13 years is a long time to be in power, and there have been an awful lot of changes and chaos over that time.
Kitty, weigh in here. Would you agree with that take? I mean, why now? Why make the switch now? And how long can it really last?
I'd absolutely agree with John. I think businesses see which way the polls are going, 20 points ahead, as you said, and they're sort of following where the power will lie. And we're expecting the election probably in the autumn of next year. And if you're a business, you want stability. And actually, some people accuse Keir Starmer of being boring, but actually I think for businesses, that's what they want, right? And yesterday's announcement by the Prime Minister about changing tack on environmental policies has brought out business worries about the Conservatives that John rightly ascribes to Brexit, and also the Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget last year. And actually people are looking towards Labour and going, well, this guy may look boring, but that's what we want.
Well, you talk about boring, and then Rishi Sunak gives you a complete U-turn on this environmental policy. What is the thought on that? I mean, is it politics at the end of the day?
I know, he's saying it's not politics, and you're like, come on.
Kind of sounds like it.
Yeah, exactly. Come off it.
Yeah.
Yes, of course it's politics, and everything should be seen within the light of the election next year. In fact, when we got back from everyone's summer holidays, Labour were kind of off to a flying start, and they started doing their election politics already. And I think the Tories kind of went, oh, actually, you know, they'd sort of been waiting for the economy to pick up, for inflation to go down, and for success on small boats crossing the channel. And actually now I think they've decided that they need to make some big policy changes. And this is the first probably of many. The other one being HS2, the high-speed rail link between London and the north of England. That looks like it's going to be scaled back too. And of course they're working in the economic environment that they have to. So yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely politics.
I wonder how much of the politics then translates to the markets. And John, this is where I'm going to come right back with you here. In terms of the economy, I mean, all the issues that Kitty just brought up are going to show up in the election campaign. How much volatility does that bring into the fundamentals of the UK going into 2024?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't think the politics is going to matter that much, because whoever gets elected, you know, they're operating within a kind of restrained environment, because our debt to GDP is very high. I mean, it's, you know, it's in line with other nations, but it doesn't give a lot of room for manoeuvre. You know, Labour's had to scale back its own spending plans in order to kind of encourage confidence. So from that point of view, I think the thing that's going to matter more actually is what happens to inflation and interest rates. Obviously, we've got an interest rate decision later on today. The hope is that we're somewhere near the peak, and also the hope is that kind of come 2024, inflation doesn't come roaring back. But it's very much going to depend on that for the markets as far as, you know, the rest of it goes. The one risk, I think, is if a coalition government starts to look likely, because that would introduce something new. I mean, at the end of the day, if the Tories get back in, people have got a rough idea of what will happen. If Labour has a clear victory, they've got a rough idea of what will happen. But if it's all up in the air and there isn't a clear win on either side, then I can see that being a risk. But we'll only really find out about that much closer to the election, which is presumably going to be in November.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so selfishly, I am a new resident of London and the UK broadly, so indulge me here. When are taxes going to come down?
Oh, you picked the wrong time to move. It's, yeah, no, that, I mean, I think we'd all like taxes to come down, but I don't see that as being something that anyone will propose before the election. We need to see the economy bouncing back first.
Any hope there, Kitty? Am I going to have a smaller tax bill?
Well, actually, I'd have to disagree with you there, John, because part of the reason that the Tories are scaling back HS2 and possibly other big ticket items this autumn is in the hope that they can cut taxes in the run-up to the election. So there'll be another budget in probably March, and I think Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt would very much like, and quite a lot of his Conservative MPs would like, to go into an election campaign saying, we're proper Tories, we're the party of low taxes and smaller government.
I feel like it almost requires a little bit of patience, which I don't have, but certainly something we'll keep an eye on. Bloomberg's John Stepek and Kitty Donaldson talking to us about the things we really care about, tax cuts. Coming up on the program, we take a look at the state of the tech investment landscape in the United Kingdom. We're joined by Eileen Burbidge, partner at Passion Capital and the UK Treasury's former special envoy for fintech. This is Bloomberg.
The sooner we can get beyond the kind of, oh my gosh, is it going to be the end of the world kind of thing, which I think has a paralysing effect on the debate, It doesn't, it just everyone goes, ah!
And when there's bias in the here and now.
And yes, I think there are a lot of here and now issues that we can deal with, whether it's elections, whether it's misinformation, whether it's transparency, whether it's provenance. And I certainly urge lawmakers to kind of, fixate on that.
The big real-world event is this technology revolution. And particularly with generative AI, it's going to change everything. It's going to change the way we live, the way we work. It should change government, by the way government operates, the way public services operate. It's got enormous potential to change the healthcare system for the better. But then there are huge risks, because it's a general-purpose technology. You can use it for bad as well as for good.
Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair there, as well as former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, now of Meta, both talking about the rise of artificial intelligence, something that, of course, is worrying policymakers and ex-policymakers around the world alike. Which brings me to one of the tech stories that we are watching very, very closely. You are seeing breaking news at the moment that Google is considering dropping Broadcom as its AI chip supplier. This information coming from the information, the publication that, of course, covers these tech stories. And remember, this is coming up amid a broader move from a lot of these big, tough companies to move away from the likes of Broadcom and Qualcomm. You'll remember that Apple, for example, did the same thing with Qualcomm, saying instead, we're going to build our chips in-house. Now, the good news for Broadcom is that they have built a reputation on diversifying their business. So the hit is not as significant as you saw in Qualcomm, for example, but a hit nonetheless. Broadcom shares down 4.6% in the pre-market. Alphabet shares down almost 1% as well. Now, joining us now to stick with the theme of tech, and specifically tech investment, is Eileen Burbidge, partner at Passion Capital and the former special envoy for fintech for the UK Treasury. Now, there is so much I want to ask you, but let's start with, I think, the story that is capturing a lot of hearts and minds and perhaps patience of a lot of people around the world, which is, of course, Rishi Sunak's kind of U-turn on his green policy. Some people would say it's politics. Some people would say it's economics. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so far be it from me to cast a personal view, but I think it's clear that he's trying to prepare for a general election. And he says that he's trying to soften the transition, right? Personally, I think that that's a bit difficult because he also says he's committed to the 2050 commitments and those targets. I don't know how we do that if we ease off now. But as an investor, I'm optimistic because I think there's an opportunity now for startups and tech-enabled companies to maybe fill in the gap. So where Rishi Sunak and the government is taking away the stick sort of impact of driving change, maybe there are tech-enabled companies, startups, I don't know, like Isometric, like Supercritical, like Safi, which are a few, just to name just some early stage ones, that'll provide the carrot to incentivize companies and basically society overall to try and, enact some change.
Well, I think it's interesting that we're talking about enacting change here, and I want to broaden out this conversation before we go into perhaps other areas of interest, because as, again, a brand new Londoner, I'm going to keep on saying that until I'm blue in the face, I'm curious about the investment landscape in the UK broadly. I mean, it's quite clear, I think, even with the latest IPO arm, of course, that a lot of people are pulling away from the UK, even though London remains the dominant center of Europe. What changes that? Do you think Rishi Sunak can change that?
I think there's a lot that can be done to change it, but I would actually try and sort of correct the record a bit. I'm not sure that people have been pulling back, especially in recent times. I think that Brexit, inevitably, especially from a business and a commercial point of view, had a sort of a pausing effect and gave people pause in terms of expanding in the UK, coming to the UK, starting up in the UK, or what they were going to be doing in the UK. And there was definitely some sort of retreat, especially in financial services and the like. Since then, though, so in the last 5 years, and certainly post-COVID, I do think the UK continues to be one of the top destinations in Europe for people who are considering Europe and companies who are considering Europe. I don't think actually the ARM decision is necessarily new. I think everybody knew it was going to go one way or the other. Yeah. I'm sure the government would have been disappointed that it couldn't have been a boost for the UK. But I guess my point is I'm not sure it looked as much of a ding or a loss as it was a lost opportunity and an opportunity not to show strength.
So where does the fiscal policy then come in handy when attracting the arm that will be armed 10 years down the road, the newbies, the ones that they really want to, especially in the fintech space, kind of grow, foster, and keep here? What kind of foundational things need to be put into place right now?
Yeah, you mentioned sort of financial policy or fiduciary policy or fiscal policy. I think there's a lot even outside of that. So immigration, visas for talent, that is the biggest sort of battle that any company is having at any location or any hub around the world, trying to hire more people in order to fill those really, really talented and skilled roles. You heard Tony Blair, you heard Nick Clegg talking about artificial intelligence. We need to keep a centre of excellence here in the UK, and actually the government's saying and doing a lot about that right now. But then there are other things for those entrepreneurs that can be done as well. Entrepreneurs tax relief, corporation tax, in addition to sort of supporting immigration. Things such as, the enterprise investment scheme to encourage investment in early stage companies. Also EMI policy for stock options and incentivizing employees. So there's really a lot that can be done in addition to the rhetoric, which I think the government's already started in trying to say we're an attractive place, but they've got to back that up then with action.
You said the buzzword there, which is tax policy, and we just talked about this from a consumer point of view, living in London, but from a corporate point of view, it matters as well. I think Amazon, and I want to say Alphabet as well, have just recently downsized their presence here, again, because they don't want to pay as many corporate taxes. Is that something that's even open to consideration, making the UK more tax-friendly in a way that, say, 5 years ago, Ireland had?
Yeah. I mean, I think we do want to reduce sort of red tape and the administrative burden and regulatory burden, potentially, if there is any, with respect to taxes. However, I do think it's reasonable to have companies pay tax on income that they make here in this jurisdiction. That is the right thing to do, and that helps all of us as citizens and fellow taxpayers as well.
The regulatory piece is interesting, and for time, I won't ask you about the CMA and the Microsoft Activision deal. I'll spare you, but many thoughts. Eileen Burbidge stays with us, partner at Passion Capital. Way more analysis next. You don't want to miss it. This is Bloomberg. Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg UK. I'm Kriti Gupta in London. Still with us, Eileen Burbidge, partner at Passion Capital and the former UK Treasury Special Envoy for fintech. More importantly, a former Dallas resident. May I just give a little shout out to that? Let's start with where in this kind of investment landscape, specifically in the UK, looks good to you.
Yeah, so we are early stage investors at Passion, which I think is really fortunate, and it's a bit of a luxury, right? Because we're investing at the very beginning in the formation stages of businesses. It means that we are probably less valuation sensitive than growth investors and people who are thinking about maybe getting a return within 2 or 3 years' time. Our time horizon is really for long-term value creation, and so whether the market's doing well or the market's doing a little bit less well, we can then get really good value. So sectors we're really excited about obviously include AI, as we heard sort of earlier in the hour. But I'm personally really interested in healthcare right now. I think having been a US resident, born and raised, and then now being here in the UK, I really appreciate the differences between the healthcare system in America, the NHS here in the UK, and public healthcare system. But I think that gap is ever narrowing. And unfortunately, as beautiful and wonderful as the NHS is, I fear that we won't be able to rely on it for sort of decades to come. And I think there's a massive opportunity for private payer sort of models. And so one of the things I have the privilege of doing is also running for TIFA, which is a Passion Capital portfolio company, so disclosure there. But we do reproductive health benefits. We sell to employers who are looking after the well-being and the health of their employees. And so opportunities like that make a lot of sense to me, and I think come from people really thinking about where are we headed.
Well, sticking with the healthcare space, though, I mean, the NHS is known worldwide for kind of being this very early mover on universal healthcare, but the cracks in it, specifically coming from funding, are concerning. I'm curious about the appetite for private healthcare amid a population that isn't used to paying for healthcare. Is affordability, especially right now, an issue?
100%. That's one of the reasons I'm so proud of what we do at Fertifa, is because what we are banking on, or we're predicated on, is employer-funded healthcare. Now, that still doesn't come close to universal, as you mentioned. It means that we'll still have an accessibility problem here in the UK, but it's going some way towards bridging that gap. And I believe, like I was saying, there's so many other things that we need as well to complement this and to fill in the gap. But I'm convinced that we can't rely on public taxpayer-funded healthcare for all of us in a way that we would all want it. Look at the strikes, unfortunately. Look at the wait lists, unfortunately. And it's tragic, and it's really a shame. And I'm hoping that our policymakers will be able to figure it out. But in the meantime, I see a massive opportunity for the well-being of all of us in order for private payer models, whether that's employers, individuals, or maybe some other schemes.
So in our last minute, though, what is the time horizon on that? Because, again, we're talking about affordability. My favorite stat from the IMF and from the World Bank is that it's going to take like 5 years for the UK economy to fully recover. What is your time horizon on flipping those profits? Got about 30 seconds here.
Yeah, so we are long-term. We look at sort of 8 to 12-year time horizons, but obviously the quicker the better. And I think there's a real near-term as well as long-term opportunity in healthcare, like for Tifa and other businesses.
Well, let's see if it pays off. Eileen Burbidge, partner at Passion Capital and the UK's Treasury's former special envoy at fintech. We thank you as always. Now, later today, the UK Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will be speaking to Bloomberg ahead of the AI summit in London. It's an interview you do not want to miss. Coming up on Balance of Power, coming up at 10:10 p.m. in London, 5:10 p.m. in Eastern Time. And of course, be sure to subscribe to Bloomberg's In the City podcast that I host, that Francine Lacqua hosts alongside David Merritt on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Those new episodes drop every Thursday, and might I add, are really fun to listen to. Up next, you have the Bloomberg Brief. Danny Berger in London and Manus Craney in New York. They're going to walk you through the Fed's hangover, the BOE, and I'm sure a slew of other topics you don't want to miss, because at the end of the day, it is Central Bank Palooza, and there is a lot to digest. You're going to want their international expertise. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.